Okay. Welcome and thank you again for joining the Alliance of Design and Construction Professionals LinkedIn Live event and YouTube live stream. Today's topic that we're going to be discussing is interdisciplinary collaboration in academia. On today's panel, we have Rose, the Interior Architecture and Design Program Coordinator from UMass Dartmouth, Stephanie, Assistant Professor from Dartmouth, UMass Dartmouth, Jonathan, Assistant Teaching Professor, UMass Dartmouth, Ethan Liu, Assistant Chair of Interior Design at FIT, and Chelsea Beardsley, Interior Designer at Clark Anderson, and a recent graduate from Colorado State. Casey Young, Interior Architecture and Design student from UMass. Cameron Ferreira, engineering student from UMass, and Jacqueline Brownstein, an interior design student from FIT. We're going to break this down into a bunch of questions that we've come up with for the discussion. And our first question is going to be about the impact and future directions of the collaboration. And for that, we're going to call on Jacqueline, Casey, Cameron, and Stephanie. I'd like you, Jacqueline, you get to go first to address our first question. How do you define interdisciplinary collaboration within the context of academia, especially in the fields of interior design, architecture, engineering, and construction?
Yeah, so I think it's all about learning from one another and kind of getting a taste of each field, especially like while you're in school, whether that's collaborating with professors who are in different fields in the profession, or if that's talking to other students who may have experiences that you don't in other fields. And I think it's really about just gathering knowledge from all areas.
All right, Casey?
I would define it as a collaboration effort between students from different majors or fields coming together to solve problems. Interior design, architecture, engineering, and construction are all so intertwined that when we collaborate, we can come up with some pretty impressive design solutions.
Okay, Cameron, you're next.
Kind of follow what Casey and Jacqueline were saying. We're all so interconnected. It's basically kind of how we approach and apply the same concepts just from different perspectives. So it's always nice to kind of have a fresh set of eyes when you're dealing with something as well as somebody else's expertise in a topic to be able to problem solve and brainstorm for a variety of situations.
All right, great. And Stephanie is one of our educators online.
Yeah, so coming at it from the educator's perspective, I know for us, integrating interdisciplinary collaborations in the classroom is really important because I think it helps to simulate the working environment that our students will experience when they get in the field. And that's one of the primary reasons I know I have felt it was important to integrate that into the classroom. As the student said, the opportunity to have those conversations with some of the adjacent fields such as architecture, engineering, and design. And, they're not going to be working independently on projects. They're going to have those kind of collaborations when they're working in the profession. So again, simulating that academically helps them prepare for their profession.
Great, thank you. All right, move on to the next question, which is concerning navigating the different perspectives. I'll move the panel around a little bit. All right. There we go. All right, to this we have Stephanie, an educator, Ethan, an educator, and Chelsea, a recent graduate. As each discipline brings a unique perspective and expertise to a project, what are some of the common challenges faced during interdisciplinary collaboration? And can you suggest some strategies that could be used to overcome barriers to promote collaboration and to achieve successful projects? Why don't we start with Stephanie?
Sure. Yeah, the most recent interdisciplinary class we offered had interior design students and engineers working together. And some of the challenges we experienced at first were just trying to speak the same language, right? Some of the terminology used in the two fields can be different, and making sure we're all on the same playing field. So just starting to introduce the students in the classroom to what each discipline does. And we did that through a series of exercises and having the students talk about what they bring to the table from their discipline. Another challenge is just time constraints. I mean, the way that a designer might work on a project and an engineer is quite different. One being a lot more technical and the other one maybe involving a lot more of a creative aspect. And the time involved in those different parts of the process can vary. So when you're bringing the disciplines together and making sure that they're working collectively, trying to manage that time for the different perspectives can be challenging.
Hey, Ethan?
Yes, thank you, Delix. I think from my perspective, some of the challenges include just having different priorities. I think, for example, innovation versus practicality. Interior designers, architects might prioritize aesthetics, while engineers might, more or less focus on the structural integrity or the functionality of the space. So I just think, differing priorities in terms of thoughts. And also, sometimes there are some role overlaps and possibly turf battles, if I can use that term. There may be instances where both disciplines feel that their expertise overlap, and this often creates, sort of like a battle, for example, sometimes between architects and interior designers. And I think clarifying roles and establishing clear boundaries might sometimes mitigate such, turf battles, for instance. And I think Stephanie also touched upon this, but sometimes there's a communication disconnect. As professionals, we'll speak different professional languages. So interior designers and engineers might say different things, and that might lead to different misinterpretations or misunderstanding. And I think ways to overcome barriers to promote this collaboration might be to follow the integrated design process, IDP. So that's a very common thing that, even when I was in school, we learned about. And that basically requires that all the stakeholders that are involved in the project meet really early in the beginning phases of the project to go over the plans and the specifications and to develop optimal solutions for each discipline, so that essentially there's no kind of turf battle, but you have a clear understanding and you communicate very early on what is expected of each professional. And I think addressing some of these challenges just really requires a strong leadership, clear communication skills and channel, and mostly just mutual respect between the professional members.
All right, Chelsea, you're new to all this. I love to also know your insight, the difference, how it went from academia, and then how that transitioned also into the practical field.
Definitely, yeah. You'll have to forgive me as I'm like fully immersed in the professional field of it now. But for the last 13 years, I was striving for an in and out of my academic career, so I understand the importance of interdisciplinary work and getting that experience during your education. What it looks like today, I work at a firm that has all engineering and architecture and design in-house, and so that's really great. And it's not what I'm used to. I worked at a firm where it was only interior design and architecture, and then when we subbed out to consultants, and it's way nicer. I can just walk over to my coworker's desk and ask him about the electrical, the considerations for the space. But the challenges that I see day to day are kind of both what Stephanie and Andy were talking about, that there are like the turf wars, like my piece of the pie is very important, like do not step on my piece of the pie. It is like a turf battle, and making sure that I'm not under-considered or over-considered. But sometimes I go into the conversations assuming that I underestimate other people's work and experience and their scope of work, and then sometimes I overthink that people are underestimating mine. Like, oh, well, she just wants granite countertops and all of that kind of stuff. But so it's I think it's a solution to those barriers is coming to the table with a really open mind and being able to have those conversations, and like Ethan talked about, like setting those boundaries and being able to come into the middle. And I think that just happens project to project. Every project has a different needs, it has a different owner, it has a different team that has different focuses and different expertise. And on some projects, maybe the plumbing is really important to fix, and like the interior design finishes are a little bit more on the back burner, and or vice versa. Like this needs a total facelift and the plumbing's great. Like it's going to be different every time. And so being able to be flexible, but also being able to do what you need to do for your discipline, and to to do the best work you can for your client and your project and your team. So it's always going to be a balancing act. I don't think there's ever going to be like a time where it's all perfect every time, and there's not those conversations or that uphill battle of interdisciplinary work.
I agree with everything you said. Again, we have a small boutique firm, and I think as I'm towards this latter half of my career, I think the key word that we've come up with is trust. Starting early, and it's taking me 25 years to finally have a team where we just trust each other from the beginning to the end. So much so we know when we can make a phone call, when we can lie, and nobody's insulted by saying no or let's look at it a different way. And I think that's a huge component of this. That I was very fortunate. Started in academia for me, coming from a different career path. So something to think about. All right, next one. Innovative solutions. We're going to ask Stephanie to stay on, Jonathan and Cameron to join us. Hi, guys. All right. I'm going to turn it around a little bit. Jonathan, I'll start with you. Can you provide some examples of how interdisciplinary collaboration has led to innovative solutions, approaches, and a positive collaboration for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as Stephanie mentioned earlier, her and I co-taught a climate resilience course with both interior architecture and engineering students. And Cameron was one of our engineering students as a part of that class. And we did that because we both felt that in our own disciplines, climate change is a real phenomenon that is going to impact us both. We know that both civil engineers and interior architects are going to be at the front line of some of the innovative solutions going forward to try to both combat climate change in terms of reducing our energy usage, but at the same time designing for resiliency, right? Resiliency within our towns and cities. So we approached the city of Fall River to basically do a full site plan of a site that they're redeveloping in this area. And the multidisciplinary aspect, what I really thought it brought to the table is, on the one hand, I also teach a senior design course in which it's only civil engineers. And while they could have taken on the same project, they would have done it nowhere near the justice that it needed to be. We could certainly design the roadways, we could certainly design a lot of the green infrastructure and so forth, right? But it would not have been the kind of design that the city was looking for. So by coming together, really able to develop a much more complete design, a design that we believe, right, could actually be adopted by the city going forward.
That's great. Stephanie, you get to pick up the second part of that story.
Sure. And that's perfect because I can piggyback off what John said about our class in that, for us from the design perspective and for our design students, it allowed us to propose things. We often as designers have ideas of what we want to put in the space. And for the climate change, thinking about things like solar panels or pervious pavement. And we know we want to have it there, but the engineers helped our students understand what was truly practical and what impact that might have on the project or on the community in which we were designing for. So it allowed for us as design students, instead of just proposing things and hoping that what we would put into the project would, hypothetically work, the engineers could sit beside my students and say, yeah, you can integrate that, or we might need to pull back. And alternatively, I think our design students kind of pushed the engineers to think a little more broadly and a little bit more innovative than they might traditionally. And I see Cameron nodding because, they're really focused on the calculations and making sure, again, the practical application happens. And the design students kind of push them like, well, can we do this a little differently? So I'll let Cameron take it from there, from his experience in the class.
Yeah, to continue off that, there was just really something special, kind of like a interesting kind of ebb and flow when you literally get to just sit next to each other and just have that discourse on, practicality and then what you want to have be involved in your solutions and your ideas. It was just kind of a very interesting, almost give and take, but also at the same time, a very no, we're all in this together kind of situation, in which I believe my group did a fantastic job for what we were able to accomplish in a relatively short time frame for a design. We had great renderings along with some pretty detailed engineering layouts and some calculations involved, but it was just altogether just such a unique experience that you get to then appreciate what the other person is bringing to the table, because having that conversation with somebody on the other, side of the design, you now get to really kind of work with them and see kind of all the hard work and time that goes into what they do, as opposed to where maybe in industry, like, you're only communicating on a chain email every now and then back and forth. And it's just like, oh, like, here's my updated PDF. We had to change this because of XYZ. And then that's all you talk about, and that's all you get. But this experience was just such a kind of breath of fresh air and able to actually have that face-to-face discourse. And it really felt more collaborative than any other project I've been involved with.
So the takeaway from that almost sounds like early start as a team, and then and again, starting off with mutual respect, with no baggage.
Exactly.
Is really the key.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. Next, we're going to go on to the impact and future directions. And we're going to join Jacqueline, Casey, Cameron, and Rose. Great, everybody's here. Okay. Let's start with Rose. From your perspective, what impact do you believe interdisciplinary collaboration will have on the future of academia in related fields of design and construction? And then I have a couple of backup questions for that.
Well, I feel like it's very important to have it in the academic field, because when you're going through sort of your primary exposure to the field, we're not insulated. We work with paraprofessionals all the time. And to have this opportunity to experience that before you step into an internship or your full-time job, it's nice to have the opportunity to practice, to understand the roles, to have that exploratory time to say, oh, you're an environmental engineer, you're an electrical, you're a mechanical. I'm in interiors. I focus. What is your focus? What is my focus? Almost going back to what was said prior onto explaining in an integrated design model what your scope is. And then there's some blurred lines. And how do we sort of address those blurred lines? So I feel like, experimentation and integrating this into one's academic experience is critical and should be, I believe, required, that you have that sort of exposure either as in a studio or as an internship opportunity.
That's great. Thank you. All right. Jacqueline, your turn.
Yeah, I think as much real world experience as we can get is vital in just preparing us to go out into the world and see what it's really like, and understanding what other people's jobs consist of and how we can help to collaborate with them and make design possible. And having that implemented in academics and what I learn at school is important. And so I think that it will impact the future designers, the future engineers, architects that are going out into the world.
Okay. Casey.
Yeah, I think collaboration makes students prepare and become better professionals for the working environment. Opportunities like this allow us to understand other jobs and expertise, and it makes projects run smoother and provides a greater outcome. And I believe and I hope that in the future we will see this become a standard in academic institutions because of the value that comes out of these collaborations.
All right. And Cameron, I'm going to switch up the question a little bit. How do you think the collaboration helps to educate each other, besides just language and learning to communicate? But I know from our practice, there just becomes a greater understanding and appreciation for the rest of the team. And I think, you have experience with that.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, you're never ever really doing work solo in our type of fields. You're always in a team environment. You're always going to be working with one another. When you're always going to have either like somebody above you or somebody to the side of you, or even just as kind of like a mentor. from wherever you come from. It may be an academic mentor, maybe a working mentor. You're going to have to collaborate in one way, shape, or form. You're not going to be able to do all of this by yourself. So it's just a key factor in kind of developing those social relationships between the other types of people you're going to be working with. Like you were saying, between sharing common language, like I know architecture and engineering all love their acronyms. So that's kind of like a big common thread. But being able to communicate effectively will ultimately make it for a better working environment, but also for a better social and emotional environment. And less of a kind of, oh, it's like your fault and pointing fingers, to okay, what can we do together? And that we is the kind of the really key ingredient that we gain from I'm having trouble with the word too, with our collaborations.
So I would say also, because again, I'm on the backside of this question, I'm the one who ends up hiring after you all graduate. And what we try to do, because we realize, time in school is limited, is, again, from interior design's point of view, is meet the cabinet maker, hang out with him for a day, meet the tile guy. The rule of thumb I was always taught was learn what somebody else does, so you can understand when you're on a job site when they're getting it right and when they're getting it wrong. And I think that's really important, that this, again, it's extending that collaboration to another level that we really have to keep in the back of our minds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just add on to that? Something that Cameron said, I just want to piggyback on. Sorry, Douglas, I just jumped in. But you talked about the team, we. And I thought that was it's such an important, critical aspect. Because when we do these large service learning, interdisciplinary projects, you get to work in a team. But unfortunately, some projects, when you go through school and your academic experience, it's my design, I did this. And that's not how it really works, when you're out working for firms. So that's sort of, I love that you said that, Cameron. And I think we need to have more team experience so students are better suited. I know we have it in our curriculum. We always try to have, at least one or two team projects. And I know, the students don't embrace it. They prefer to work on their own little baby. Yeah. And it made me think, we should have, and I would love to foster more advanced degrees that are interdisciplinary based, that we have a design engineering degree, that we have a design healthcare. We work with I know that this is how we work in the profession. And I'm wondering, maybe it's advanced, not at the undergrad, at the graduate, that we do more of these interdisciplinary degrees. But then my mind goes, maybe it should be at the undergrad level, because sometimes, you're in one major and you're exposed to another. And, we just had a young lady that said, I'm going over to engineering. And I said, all right, because I really, think I'm a better fit there. And it's nice to figure that out, when you're in an undergrad and not graduate.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think at the undergraduate level, you have hopefully a broad enough perspective that you're going to keep your eyes open and kind of look at everything, number one. And two, during that portion of your education, you have the opportunity, as I was allowed to have, of different type of internships.
Yeah.
And I think it's up to the educator to foster those different avenues, and what's available, and taking the time to understand, well, it might not be what you're going to do, but you're going to need to have that in your toolbox at some point in your life. And I think that's real important. All right. Welcome back, Casey. All right. We're going to move on to the next one, education and training. All right. And there's Chelsea. Good. Okay. I'm going to start with Chelsea on this one. Chelsea, since you're a recent graduate, yay. What strategies can educational institutions employ to better prepare their students for interdisciplinary collaboration in their respective fields?
Yeah, it's hard, I mean, 4 years for an undergrad is not a lot of time. Like, it sounds like it, but it's not. Like, we have to get, I mean, I think CSU's was like 120 credits or something, and then I double minored because I can't sit still. And so my dream answer would be, more projects with more disciplines. CSU partners really well with the construction management program, and I minored in that. And I wish we had more projects with them. I got to take the classes and know what they learned partly, and but I know that some of that in my program faltered a little bit during COVID. I know there was a lot more of that in the program before my time, and it's starting to build up again after my time at that program. But again, like, I mean, same with the group projects that Rose was talking about. Sometimes students don't always embrace that either. It's more of it takes longer. It's, you got to depend on people who might not be dependable, so it's challenging. But other things could be giving students the space to explore other realms. I had friends minor in business. I had friends minor in sustainability. So being able to explore things that interest you and give you a passion, I think also gives a lot of people really great points of views and perspectives on things when they come together for a project. So those are just some of my, I'll leave more for other people to answer too. So yeah, some of my opinions.
All right, Casey.
Yeah, so I might be piggybacking a little bit, but I think I have 3 strategies. One being the classes. So I was in Stephanie and Professor Miller's class last semester where we were learning besides engineering students, which was so helpful. And then from there, we got projects where we took our lectures and then we got a project that we could put what we learned into practice. And then I also think flexible programs. So being able to maybe minor in an engineering field, or even if you had a structural engineering major that wanted to minor in interior architecture, I think that could be very beneficial to students.
Great. All right, Jacqueline?
Yeah, so I agree. I think also having site visits or field trips with your school can really benefit and just getting to see what it's actually like on the site. I've been able to do this with the interior design club at my school. That's been really helpful, as well as I think interdisciplinary competitions, things such as scholarships, where you can kind of broaden your knowledge and learn and dabble a bit in other respective areas.
All right, and Cameron?
And kind of to piggyback what Chelsea said a little bit, in fitting it into undergrad, you're already doing so much time. So maybe just kind of a twist to the curriculum. I know, at least from a civil engineering perspective, that we have a senior design capstone project that's an entire senior year long. That's you dedicated to one particular project. And for my undergraduate degree, mine was designing a tentable patio. So a patio that had anchor supports to put up a modular tent. And we were coming up with also sorts of different layouts and other stuff. And at the end of the first semester, we did the presentation. And a lot of the feedback was, this is all the work you've done so far seems very architecture based. Like, where's the engineering work? And that would have been a perfect example of a joint project between architecture and civil engineering to kind of design this collaborative space and be able to focus on their own strengths and the curriculum that they learned in a practical sense. So just kind of getting the opportunity to work in more of a realistic working environment would be super helpful. In my experience in industry, when I first met with an architect, we had one meeting with the client, and then I never saw them again. I only ever got emails every now and then with their updated PDFs. Didn't even hop on like a Teams call or anything like that. It was just very, very isolated, and it was not a positive experience in my opinion, because then all of a sudden I get these plan sets that then I have to put into my plan set and then figure out how that works. And then the fonts are different, so then that looks bad. And then we have to go back and collaborate back and forth via email, when it would just been easier to be able to kind of get that in a collaborative working environment where I can just be like, oh, hey, like, here's like the one big template we're using. Here's like all the drawings that we're using, and it would just made for a smoother process for that project in particular.
Yeah, I want to pick up on two things that were just said. One was Jacqueline's comment about field trips. I know when I went to Parsons for interior design, that was a big thing because, again, while we all have our own specialties, there are so many subspecialties that we don't know exist, and that's really important. And unless you have the opportunity with someone with a knowledge base to introduce you to it, you might just pass right over it. And that's really important. And I want to back up on something that you just said about not meeting in person. We did a commercial project 1,000 years ago, and we were at the ribbon cutting ceremony, and the architect came up to me and at the bar after we were all done and said, "And who are you again?" And I said, "I was a lead interior designer." And I said, "Oh, okay." And they turned around and walked away. So that being said, times are changing. All right. All right, we did that. So let's go on to ethical considerations. Thank you. All right. Perfect. We're missing one. And, okay. And the question is going to be about ethical considerations unique to interdisciplinary collaboration in academia that may transfer to practical experiences, such as intellectual property by an individual or firm, or the use of AI within a project. Ethan, welcome back.
Hello. Yes. Yes. So this is a really tough question and an interesting question. So I'm actually on the AI committee at FIT, and there's been a lot of talks of proprietary or copyrighted work that's coming out of either academia or design firms. And for instance, if you're faculty of students or interior designers, architects, engineers use AI-assisted software, you may be inadvertently entering proprietary copyright work into their database. So really, I kind of want to focus a little bit on the ethics of maybe using AI. So what's happening with AI is that AI systems rely heavily on large data sets, right, for their own training, validation, and optimization. So determining ownership rights and access to these data sets could be pretty controversial, especially in cases where data is actually sourced from multiple parties or collected from public sources. So one example, just to give you one example of what might happen in academia is, if I were, let's say, a professor of engineering, and I had a unique way of calculating a complex model, and I entered that equation into an AI-assisted GPT platform and generative platform. So does that mean that the AI platform will use my proprietary model to learn and then possibly release some of my research or some version of my research to then someone else? That's what's happening through AI. AI is just grabbing and learning and then regurgitating the information and spitting it back out when you ask it a question, right? So most likely the answer is yes. AI will just take that information, learn, and then create a portion of it and basically throw that back out onto the public. So just something for all of us to be aware of, so that when your team, when your interdisciplinary team, let's say architects, interior designers, engineers, when you're working on a design, be a little bit cautious. Be a little bit cautious because, if you're working on a real world project, you have a client. That's the client, owns the work, and you might own the intellectual property rights of that creative work, but still the owners own the work. So you could be inadvertently releasing that information out into the public by using AI assisted software without even knowing it, right? So that's kind of just the dangers of, AI, and it does touch upon the question of ethics, right? Like, do you do something like that, or do you somehow confront the AI platform to make sure that information that's being released is not being released to the public, but rather within a sandbox, what we call it, a sandbox within just a team? So that's been kind of like a very recent controversial thing that might translate to an ethical question that engineers, architects, interior designers might have when they work on a group project together. where and how they release that information and what the consequences of that would be.
All right, Casey, why don't we go with you? Hang on one second, Casey.
Sorry.
There you go.
I believe that students need to be credited with the work that they do, whether that be in a real life situation, a firm-based situation, or AI. I haven't had much experience with AI other than this past year. I had an internship where the owner wanted to start incorporating AI into his firm to help develop floor plan options to give to clients. And I think that's just something you need to be upfront with and let a client know that it is AI generated. But that is my only experience with that.
All right, Stephanie?
Yeah, so as it relates to sort of ethics and intellectual property, one thing we experienced in the class that we've been referencing a few times today is that we had the opportunity to have the students present their final projects to the city of Fall River, and that is who we were working with as our community partner. And sorry about my lights. And we have a lot of community engaged projects that we integrate into these interdisciplinary collaborations. And so in doing that, we need to make sure that, if they go on to integrate that project, it's the problem with occupancy sensors. If they integrate that work into the project, that they're crediting the students, even though, sometimes student work is seen as something like, oh, well, they're just students, we can take that work and apply it. So it was interesting because by the time our project was presented to the city of Fall River, they had hired the firm who would be doing the redevelopment. And they asked if they could have the drawings, to see what our students had created and actually have that work. So we made sure before we sent those files over to add a watermark that was on every page, included representation of our students, and acknowledged that if this work was to be used in the future project, that they would need to credit our students or ask for permissions. And I think that's really important in those kinds of community engaged projects where maybe students aren't seen as, having the necessary skill set where they could, transfer that work over to a professional project. But if that work is seen by a potential client or community partner, or in this case, by the firm that would then be completing the project, to make sure that anything that influences that final project, that credit does get applied to the school and the students specifically.
I'm going to add to this question. How does copyright kick in to this? Because again, we're taking concept public through AI, a public platform, recreating something that we've designed, and in essence, we can turn that over to a client. So it's not just the AI part of it, but it's also the copyright and who owns the copyright. Because I know, when I present a set of drawings to a client for approval, it has my name on it. I said, until the end of the job, this is fully copyrighted. So, Ethan?
You're muted, Ethan. Oh.
Ethan, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you should own the copyright as the creator of the creative work. And what happens usually, where it gets a little bit sticky, is when you do upload that work to a different platform and somehow gets filtered, and it could then possibly be redistributed somehow in an altered form. Even though it's been redistributed in an altered form, is it still yours? Well, part of it is still yours, so you should be credited as the source of it. And very often times when you watch YouTube or you watch other video content, they will take, or even music, they will alter music or video and make it their own. So I guess the question really is there an actual percentage of alteration where you have to alter for it to become someone else's work versus your work? Or should you just be credited, like Stephanie said, to be the origins of the creator of that original work?
So I know my rule of thumb used to be 25%. So as long as at least 25% of a design, let's say cabinetry or a piece of furniture, has been changed, you've satisfied the requirements of now being an original design. But again, we're in such a gray area where the components are being modified outside of our control. Where's that fine line where the copyright remains yours or ours, and then we have to let go of it?
I think this is a bigger problem, I think, in the industry. I think in school and academia, every paper you write has to be cited. Every PowerPoint presentation that you present has to have citation at the end. So I think it's possibly less of a problem of understanding. Maybe it's still a problem of enforcing in academia,
Right.
but less of a problem of understanding it. But I think in the professional world, the industry, there is really no enforcer there, right? There's no professor, there's no faculty member going, oh, you just copied someone's work, but you didn't cite it. So I think that's where it gets really sticky, and you're in the gray area when it comes to professional practice. How do you enforce someone that has copied someone else's design? You know, and how do you prove it? That's another issue. So,
All right, well, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the next one. Professional team dynamics. Jonathan, Chelsea. Okay. One more. There we go. Okay. Jonathan, you're new to the party. So, simple. Which design professional is in charge? And then the future question is, after we've set who's in charge, we all have to answer the building officials. And how do we do that?
Sure thing. Yeah. So, I don't know if anybody's really in charge per se, but what I will say to this, right, I think an important point that one of the difficulties about running the class that Stephanie and I ran last semester was just the order in which things kind of naturally have to happen, right? So you're trying to run a 14-week course, and you're trying to introduce all the various topics that you need to, so the students can have the core content that they need to develop their designs. But in reality, a lot of the architectural designs and kind of the overall plan really needs to be at least in terms of some stage of development before the engineers can really step in and sort of finalize that design, so to speak. So that became kind of an issue, right, when we were working this year. It was, in some ways, the architectural students' work was a little bit front-loaded in the semester, and the engineers' work was a little bit back-loaded in the semester, right? There was some time where the engineers were kind of waiting on the architectural students to come up with their overall layouts and designs, and then the engineers could, right, kind of, some sense, sort of take over and do the calculations and so forth to make that design a reality. So that's one point there in terms of the practicalities of how you would teach the limitations of teaching a multidisciplinary course like that. In terms of building code officials, also, too, engineers have we can't, right? Engineering students cannot, develop designs that can be used, right?
Right.
They're not, they have to be licensed professional engineers before they can do that. So, at best, our students are developing, a first rough draft of something that would then need to be given to a real engineering firm, and the engineers have to take over and really perfect those calculations and stamp it moving forward. So yeah, it's not really something our engineers can do. Engineering students can do anyway, is develop a usable design in that sense. So they're more idea generators.
All right, Ethan.
oh yes, well, I love Jonathan's answer. So diplomatic and so great. So I'll give a similar one. So it really depends. I'm assuming we're moving away from students, and now we're in a professional working team dynamic. I think it really depends on the jurisdiction and also on the client and project scope, right? So like, for instance, if you're working on a skyscraper, usually an architecture team would probably lead, and they would be called a prime consultant, right? Whereas if you're working on a bridge or a tunnel, you'll have the engineers as prime consultants. I worked in the past about 20 years ago on a transit system project in New York City, Second Avenue subway, where the engineers were really the lead. They were the prime, and architects were actually the subs of that big company that actually took over the project. So I think it really just depends on the client and the scope of work. That'll naturally kind of dictate who will lead. Now, what gets a little bit sticky is with interior design, because what happens with interior design is that a lot of architects and also a lot of interior designers want to be the lead, right? So in that specific case, a jurisdiction is really the variable factor. Some jurisdiction in the U.S., we call them jurisdictions, not necessarily just states, because there's D.C., which is a jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions allow their interior designers to stamp their own drawings at the buildings department, right? So in fact, interior designers can lead their own projects from start to finish within those jurisdictions. And what gets really interesting is that if that is the case, then, well, interior designers are the lead in those jurisdictions, but then not in other jurisdictions. So that's where it gets a little bit sticky. But I do want to caveat that even though interior designers are leading, it's a very specific scope, meaning it's scope specific. Interior designers are still not pursuing any structural or mechanical or electrical or plumbing type of work that engineers, like such as Jonathan would be teaching his students and pursuing professionally. And those interior designers that do lead, they specifically work on space planning, FF&E, for spaces, and they don't alter any bearing walls or columns, right? Because that's still under the scope of the structural engineer. So I guess my answer to that would just be, really, there's not usually one person that leads. It just depends on the scope, your client, and also the jurisdiction you're in. So I know it's a complicated answer, but I think it deserves
complicated answer.
Explain. Yeah, it just deserves a complicated answer to that.
All right, Chelsea, in your experience.
Yeah, similar to Jonathan and Ethan, I think it depends on the project too. We just wrapped up a project, construction documents, that was 200,000 square feet. And we had, the way that project was structured, there's a project manager, he's an architect, and like everything went through him, and it's still going through him, and it's going to go through him the rest of the project. And so he seems to be the leader in this project. But then I'm on a smaller project that's like 5 rooms, and it's all very equal. Like, we're all kind of an equal team. We're all pulling weight, and we're all working the same hours. We're all talking to the client, but then, so I think it depends on the project, and that, again, that client, and what that's going to look like, and the needs. Again, I think it just all comes back to needs, and then workloads start getting tied into that, and the different scopes of work too. And yeah, so it's a complicated answer. I often want to be the one, like, I'm in charge, like it's me. But as an interior designer, that is a very specific scope of work, and I can't run a project by myself. I do need all these other disciplines most of the time helping me along in a project. And because it's in my profession, and as a commercial interior designer, it's rarely just surface finishes. So we're cutting into concrete, we're getting into walls, so things get messy really quickly. And as an early interior designer, I don't have my NCIDQ, and the state of Colorado does not recognize interior designers as being able to stamp and seal any of their drawings, no matter what the work is. We're working on that. I'm working on that. That means that I rely on architects and things to stamp and seal my drawings for me, but that doesn't mean I get to just slap things around in the model and not be understand codes and fire and life safety and those kinds of things. I still need to be educating myself in that, learning those things, and becoming a valuable team member and identifying those things too, even as somebody who's not licensed yet. I get to support my coworkers who are taking the liability for those things. So just considering all of that nature of things. Like, if I miss something really critical, something's not ADA compliant, I'm helping on a reception desk on a few of these projects, and if it's not ADA compliant, like, I'm going to hear about it. It doesn't matter if my name's on the drawings or not, So I have a certain responsibility to my team and my company to try and do the best I can, and my clients. And so I think all of that ties back into the topic we're talking about.
Okay, and I'm going to add something. I'm going to put the big disclaimer on this question, which is twofold. One is, for those of us who do live in states that have some sort of registration, licensing, or regulation, our scopes are defined by the state legislator. So please stay within those parameters, because that's what gives us all the design professionals their rights to do what they do for a living. But it's interesting. It still gets reinterpreted sometimes by the local building officials, and not in a bad way. But again, we've seen drawings go through that have my signature on them, which are not architectural, and they want the exact quote from the statute on the drawings. And that's so everybody understands what my scope of work can produce, similar to the engineer. It's not architecture. Same thing for the architect. It's not engineering. And what we've learned is the building officials are, especially recently, have been real acutely aware of where those lines are, and everybody staying in their lanes. On our side of the question, though, that's where the teamwork and the collaboration really helps a great deal, and something for us to keep in the back of our minds, because part of ADCP's mission is about respect and working within the different disciplines as we watch out for legislation for each other also. So that was a quick plug. All right. On that note, which works out well, we're on to advocacy. So Ethan and Rose. Thank you. All right. Last question. I'm going to do it well on time. All right. How can this important conversation start academic studies and impact future legislative efforts throughout the country? Ladies first. Rose.
I have an awful lot to say about this, but I'll keep it brief. Needless to say, I think it's critical. I think it's critical that we start with education. We explore and expand these interdisciplinary experiences, laying the foundation for when all in different disciplines enter the profession. And I think it helps foster an understanding of, as the prior question addressed, scope and what each discipline's scope is outlined, and helps build a mutual respect and understanding. And I think, Douglas, you said earlier, trust in our colleagues and what they're doing, and we respect what they're doing, and we build that trust over years that they're the best person to do that. Mm-hmm. And I also believe that these collaborative events will help expand legislation, especially that, I've been working for, interior design, to advance in states like Massachusetts that doesn't have legislation for interior design. So that when we have our day in the Hill, we actually have one on April 11th, that it's not just interior designers, that we have people from the built environment. We have our friends on the engineering side. We have our electricians. We have our homeowners and our design professionals, and everybody that works in the built environment come and support and be advocates and have different perspectives of how the profession has helped them advance their spaces in the environment. And I like also that we brought up the safety component, because it's so important that we protect the health, safety, and welfare of the occupants. And it all really boils down to that everyone is doing their job to facilitate these environments. And I'll stop there and let Ethan pick up. How's that?
Yes, great. Well, awesome. That's fantastic. I agree with everything you said, Rose. Just to add to that a little bit, I think just in general, in very early on in academic studies, I think for architects, engineers, interior designers, we all have to really mutually respect each other's profession. I mean, I'm an architect by training, and eventually I started to teach in interior design programs, and started to dabble in interior design as well. So I've kind of had the privilege of working with mostly engineers earlier on in my career, and then later with interior designers. And we have to. So I instill these values into my students, such that I want them to relinquish this protectionist doctrine that's been instilled in each of our professions, right? It's not that architecture is great or interior design is great or that engineering is great. I think we're all equally great. We all have something to contribute within our own parts. It takes an entire team to design and build a space, either you're talking about high rises, bridges, tunnels, etc. And I think as educators, we just have to show our students the strength in teamwork versus individual work.
Yeah.
And there's value in what I teach in an interior design program. There's value in what an interior designer can bring to the table that an architect and engineer may lack, either in training or expertise, right? Like FF&E. Conversely, there are many strengths and expertise that an engineer may have that bring to the table that interior designers simply don't have. They can't spec out mechanical or electrical or plumbing, right? Or structural. So engineers are invaluable when it comes to providing that expertise to interior designers, right? So I think just to go back to this idea of mutual respect, and I am going to plug interior designers just a little bit, simply because I am part of interior design program. I'm part of the consortium for interior design in New York, which is comprised of ASID, IID, and CIDQ at the national level. So this is like kind of my plug for them too. And they are actually in pursuit of securing and expanding reasonable regulation for interior design that protects the public health, safety, and well-being in co-regulated spaces, right? So the key few words there being public health and safety. And really what that means is really that the value, knowledge, integrity of current and future interior design emerging professionals will be elevated in their capacity to safeguard the health, safety, and welfare of the public, right? So I think that's a really important thing to understand and say. We already know that for engineers. We know that through and through. I mean, I tremendously respect engineers. I tremendously respect architects. And I think in many ways, we go to engineers and architects right away when we think of health, safety, and welfare. My gosh, like they are the ones stamping the drawings. But what most people don't know is that a lot of interior design students, they study building codes as part of their course requirement and also as a part of their accredited program requirement. And they also have to be educated on health, safety, and welfare at the core level. And also for interior designers, there's also the NCIDQ. That's the National Council for Interior Design Qualification exam that they have to take. It is the de facto licensing exam for interior designers. And I think that exam is extremely rigorous. And it covers MEP and lighting coordination. It also covers accessibility and codes as well, on top of building codes. So NCIDQ used to cite their own generic building code, but has since a few years ago switched over to IBC, the International Building Code, as their official code for the actual exam contents. So I think part of this is just really education. So the kind of the follow-up question is, how do we use this to educate others, right? I just want others that are listening to this, podcast to really understand that, we are not mutually exclusively supporting one profession or the other. We want to elevate all professions. And to do that, there has to be collaboration and mutual respect. So,
and I think an important part of that is once we're comfortable with the collaboration within our own industry, we can explain ourselves to legislators. So we've all had the opportunity to meet with legislators. I've done legislation in the state of Florida for the past 20 years and had many opportunities to meet with legislators. Well, you're just a pillow fluffer. Well, no, I'm not. That's not what, last thing I do is fluff a pillow. I do major construction projects, major home renovations. That's my specialty, and that's how I make a living. And I have a staff of 5, and that's how we support each other. And everybody gets to pay their bills. But again, it's changing the script on how we refer to each other first, and how we collaborate first, and how we recognize and support each other. Because again, I think in previous years, those even older than me saw things differently. And I think we're in a fortunate time where we're starting to see naturally that dialogue changing and moving in a direction where people with the education, expertise, the talents, whatever, are starting to be recognized in different ways in their own states and municipalities, where they're able to provide their services for the general public based on HSW. So I think that's really important, that we have to get comfortable first within our own skins so that we can reiterate it to those who hopefully want to understand and be a little more educated for each of the things we do. All right, everybody's back. We're all here? Okay, great. So on that, concluding remarks. The best way for design professionals to meet the challenges of the future will be through mutual respect and positive collaboration, as the influence of design impacts all facets of societal needs. From the smallest home renovation to the largest corporate development, our role is in the built environment, in changing and future impact on those projects is going to be crucial. ADCP recognizes the importance of our students, so thank you, everybody, as well as our working professionals, educators, on the important topics that we have started bringing to our friends and collaborators. So we do ask anybody who's been watching our casts support ADCP by connecting with us on LinkedIn at the Alliance of Design and Construction Professionals and subscribing to ADCP on YouTube. I want to thank everybody who's joined us today. You guys have been terrific. And we look forward to our next session, which hopefully will be about 3 months. So again, thank you, everybody. This is wonderful. And please share with your friends and colleagues. I think our topics are insightful. And I think there's something that we can help provide some more insight to our profession as a whole. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.